Hey, welcome back to Love Wins, where the truth matters because it's the truth that sets us free. All right, we're jumping back into the story of Jesus' life. He was born in Bethlehem. He went down to Egypt with his parents to escape Herod. They came back. They lived in Nazareth. And he lived and grew up in Nazareth. So we've come to his baptism. We've passed his baptism. We've covered his temptations in the wilderness. And today we are going to look at his first sermon in his home synagogue in Nazareth. You'd think that would go well. Not so much. All right, we're picking up in Luke 4, verse 14. Then Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee, and news of him went out through all the surrounding region, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified by all. So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it is written. So he knew, and he found. We need to know the book. We're never going to know the author if we don't know what the author said. And we need to know the author. And you will be happy when you know the author. You will have peace when you know the author. You will have joy when you know the author. And you will be shielded against all the nonsense when you know the author. All right, he began to read, a reading of his own choosing because he knew it was there. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Then he closed the book and he gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him. And he began to say to them, "Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." So all bore witness to him and marveled at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, "Is this not Joseph's son?" We'll come back to that. He said to them, "You will surely say this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself. Whatever we have heard done in Capernaum, do here in your town.'" Then he said, "Assuredly I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you truly, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout all the land. But to none of them was Elijah sent, except to Zarephath in the region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed, except Naaman the Syrian. All those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, they were filled with wrath. And they rose up and thrust him out of the city, and they led him to the brow of the hill on which their city was built, that they might throw him over the cliff. Not exactly what we would call a warm homecoming. What's interesting to note, and important to note, is that it started well. Now, I want us to back up and try and appreciate human nature and the broader circumstances. So Jesus was born and raised in Nazareth, but he had never done anything in Nazareth. And when he began his ministry, he began it elsewhere. So that would have caused, humans are humans, some jealousy. Or are we not good enough for him? He runs off and does all his business elsewhere? Like, what's wrong with us? But today he's back. And so they give him a chance. He reads. They like what he reads. They admit that it's gracious. They marvel. But then that little seed is expressed. Isn't this Joseph's son? What do they mean by that? Well, he's nobody. We're nobody. He's nobody. Joseph was poor. We know that because when Jesus was born, they offered doves. That's what the poor people offer. Poor people are naturally looked down upon. Nazareth as a town was looked down upon. Who is this guy? Who does he think he is? He's just one of us. And what they want is for him to prove that he is somebody. And he knows it. And before they can even ask him to do something, he says, what you've heard done in Capernaum, do here in your country? No, I'm not going to do that. In fact, I'm going to do something that you aren't going to like. But because I love you, I'm going to do something that you need. Have you ever noticed when you're on the road and somebody cuts you off or does something in traffic that's really bizarre, bad, stupid, that they're usually the ones who get mad and give you the finger or express their anger in some other way? It's almost always the one who's guilty who gets angry. In every situation where someone loses their cool, it's almost always the one who's in the wrong that does that. Jesus knows these people. He knew before he opened his mouth what the results would be. It wasn't a scenario where he's like, man, I wish I wouldn't have said that. He knew. And he said it anyway. And there's two ways to take that. You can say, well, he just wanted to stick it to them. I don't think so. Because that's not Jesus. He said it to them because they needed to hear it. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about telling people what they need to hear. And he said, you have teenagers. You tell them what they need to hear, and they get mad, and they go in the room, slam the door, maybe say some stuff they shouldn't say, maybe give some gestures they shouldn't make. Then they think about it. And there's nothing more rewarding for a parent than when your child comes back to you and says, I thought about what you said. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Jesus was willing to take the brunt of their murderous anger in order to tell them what they needed to hear. So what made them so mad? Well, if you didn't catch it, let me explain. Jesus referenced back to two events in history. One during the time of Elijah and one during the time of Elisha. Now, these are two of the most popular prophets in Israelite history, so most people know the stories of these two men. And his point is that during the time of Elijah, when there was a drought and there was no food to be found, that there were lots of widows in Israel that God could have sent Elijah to, but he sent him to a widow in Sidon, not an Israelite. And then he says, in the time of Elisha, a similar thing happened. There were lots of lepers in Israel that God could have healed, but the only one he did heal was the captain of the army of Syria. What Jesus was saying is, you have a pride problem. You think that because I was raised here, that you are somehow more deserving than everybody else. Furthermore, you think that because you're an Israelite, that you're better than the rest of the world. But you don't know your own history. Because if you read your stories and thought about them, you'd realize that God's been a God for everyone and working beyond your borders from the beginning. You would recognize that God's not for Israel and against the Palestinians, or for the Palestinians and against Israel, because God isn't like that. But you wish he was. You want to make him like that. And you want me to be your hero and to serve you. And I'm here to serve you. I'm here to serve notice that you have a pride problem. And you don't want to hear it. And I don't even want to say it. But someone has to say it. So I'm going to say it. And you can try and kill me if you want. It's not my day to die. I'm not worried about it. But I hope that when your head hits the pillow tonight, you've had your rants with your friends and you've all talked about how bad I am. That when you go to bed and it's just you and my spirit, that you'll think about the history of our people and the history of God's interactions with us and the world. That you'll remember that Abraham was promised that in him and through his seed, all the nations would be blessed. And I hope that when you wake up tomorrow, your mind is broader than it is today. That's what I hope. That's why I'm willing for you to hate me today. Because maybe tomorrow you'll love me and the world a little better. And you'll be a little more humble. One of the reasons I believe that we stay away from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and we cling to our traditions and our ideas and our certainties, is because there's a sick part of us that likes our selfish version of the story, our self-centered version of the story, our me-first version of the story, our us and them version of the story, better than the truth. That's why Jesus said, he has anointed me. He sent me here, not to put on a show for you, but to preach good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, liberty for the oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. It's been a rough week for me on my end. That's all I'm going to say about that. Except that the roughness was caused by people who want to hold on to their own story, to their own version of Jesus, instead of letting the real Jesus break through. And I make these videos hoping that many of you will choose to sit down, just you, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and find the Jesus who wants to find you and be found by you. God bless.